So when it comes to meditation, I think one of the main texts is a text by the student of Shantideva, who is Kamalashila, and his text on the Bhavana Krama, the stages of meditation. So there are three texts. So this text is very wonderful and relevant. So if there is anyone interested about meditation, then you must read this text. So we are in the 8th chapter, but the chapter on concentration, and it presents in very detail about the faults of self-centered feeling and the benefits of others' concern for other. And also it presents in very detail about the exchange and equalizing of self and other.
That day, 168.
So verse number 168. Chapter number 8.
Oh, yeah, that.
So from this verse onwards, it presents about the critics pertaining to the self-centered feeling. However, mind, although you have been advised, if you do not act in the like manner, then since all misfortunes will entrust themselves to you. So since the self-centered feeling and the grasping for true existence, so these are the main enemies that we have to defeat. So till now, even though we wish to have happiness and do not wish to have suffering, but the thing that happens opposite all the time is due to the concern, too much concern for self. Verse number 169 reads that previous time when you could overcome me is now past. Now I see your nature and your faults, and wherever you go, I shall destroy your arrogance. So this, the mind of concern is actually focused only towards oneself. And from now onwards, I wanted to change the direction of that mind, and I wanted to focus all my concern towards other. So till now, the concern, too much concern towards myself has really done a great harm for myself. Verse number 171 and verse number 172 now. 4 ages have you dealt with me like this, and I have suffered long, but now, recalling all my grudges, I shall overcome your selfish thoughts. Likewise, if I wish to be happy, I should not be happy with myself. So if you really care about yourself, then you should not harm others. And from the next verse onwards, it presents about negativities pertaining to or too much attention, too much attached to one's body.
That 185.
So please turn to verse number 185. So enough of this childish behavior. So this is very wonderful, this line. So till now, we have been always thinking about ourselves, only about myself. So the overview or the purview of my mind is very small, and it is only focused at the immediate purpose, not thinking about the long-term goal. So therefore, this kind of mind is very childish. So this, I have enough of this. So the English term enough is enough. The next line reads, I shall follow in the steps of the wise. And having recalled the advice concerning conscientiousness, I shall turn away sleep and mental dullness. Just like the compassionate sons of the conqueror, I shall patiently accept what I have to do. For if I do not make a constant effort day and night, when will my misery ever come to an end? And the verse number 87, the last line, upon the perfect object. So the name of the 8th chapter is the meditation or concentration. And when we speak about meditation, the main meditation here that this chapter present is about meditating on equalizing and changing of self and other. And the 9th chapter and the 8th chapter is the main, the prime chapter of this text. So we have to read this very often and also do some reflection and contemplation pertaining to the presentation of this text, so that we can change this mind, which is a concern always directed towards oneself. So once we change the focus or the direction of our concern, so from that day onwards, the happier journey of our life has already started. And we have discussed this in length about before. So from now onwards, after taking the Bodhisattva vow, I've been reborn in the family of Bodhisattva. So from now onwards, I will never do any negativities and always try my best to live a very meaningful life. So even though if you do not believe in any religions, but it is very important to have a very meaningful life. And if you are more warm-hearted, of course, you will have more friends. And if you are always under the influence of emotions, then ultimately it is you only who will be defeated and at the losing end. And all the 7 billion human beings in this world, as I usually say, about 6 billion are said to be accepting some religion, but that very teachings and the religious faith that one follows, if that becomes a source of happiness, the source of the arising of the afflicted emotions within us, then this is very sad. And nowadays in Middle East countries, with the religion taken as a name, we have seen a lot of murders happen every day. And in this current place, in this hall, we are all living, staying in a very calm environment, in a very peaceful way. And at the same time, another part of the world is facing great hardships and the violent and frightened, the fear, and are really the object of, we need to feel compassion towards those people. And many people are even not getting anything to eat, and many are killed. So this is very sad. And if an animal killed a man or a human, then this is something to be astonished. Oh, something bad happened. But when humans kill human, even numbering to tens of thousands of numbers, but we all take it for granted, just as a daily event. So this kind of our conception, this kind of our idea, we have to change. Otherwise, the 21st century will never be a peaceful century. And the whole world, if continues on the same violent, which is filled with hatred and anger, then the whole 7 billion, the human family, will enter in a lot of despair and suffering. We are not talking about next rebirth. We are not talking from the point of religion, religious background, but as a part of the human family, as one of the human beings in this world, we have to live in a very happier way. So nobody wants a world where everyone kills each other. Sorry, the earlier 2 chapters was not the 9th, but the 6th chapter on the patience and the 8th chapter on concentration. And I used to say that secular ethics has to be the basis of all this practice. Now next is the 9th chapter, the chapter on wisdom. And the first verse we have already done before. And the teachings of the Buddha are actually based on the wisdom. And the wisdom here, we are discussing about the wisdom understanding, the selflessness or emptiness. And in order to generate or develop such a kind of wisdom, even within the direct discourse of Buddha's teaching in Sutra, due to the different mental dispositions, Lord Buddha himself has prescribed different teachings presenting about the different subtleties of the nature. And even for the Buddha's own words, we are differentiating between them as definitive and non-definitive. And which are the sutras that present the ultimate phenomena, the emptiness, and also some of the texts which may even present about selflessness, but it may not be the ultimate, the subtlest form of emptiness, rather the gross level of selflessness pertaining to the lower schools. So therefore we need to draw a distinction here, even though the text may present a selflessness, whether it is a definitive sutra or not. So even though the text may present a very gross level of the selflessness, and if you just take it for granted as literal being teaching of Buddha, then we may be mistaken. So the great trailblazer Nagarjuna, based on the logic reasonings and by analytical process, he invented this unique way to investigate the Buddha's word by differentiating them as definitive and non-definitive. So if every sutra need to be analyzed in this way, then there won't be an end to the text, which one text to be relied upon. Because in order to prove one sutra as definitive, if we have to rely on another, then we may have to rely on another sutra or text to prove the other one as definitive. So therefore, we cannot take the scriptural sources as the ultimate reason here. So therefore, based on the logic analysis and taking the ultimate and the profound analysis as the only reliable means to confirm whether the text is a definitive or not. And whatever the text presents, if the contents are to be proved, can be proved literally without having any falsification from any profound analysis, then we can take them as granted for definitive. And also the selflessness presented here has to be further explained in terms of the Tibetan arising and Tibetan origination. And even for the Tibetan origination, there are 3 different levels. The first is the Tibetan origination pertaining to the cause and the result. And the next is the part and the whole and the part. And the third level is merely the designated Tibetan origination, which can be established only merely by the mind. So which is the third level of the Tibetan origination. And Nagarjuna when he when he preached about Tibetan origination in his text Wisdom, even from the chapter number 1 to 1 onwards, he presents about the selflessness. And in the 24th chapter, and the Madhyamika proponents who do not accept even the subtlest particle of inherent existence is being taken aside as nihilistic, so as per the lower schools. So therefore, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra cannot be also accepted as literal. And when such a assertion is there, so then when someone preach about in this way, then they are regarded as nihilist, falling on one extreme. And I think that during the time of Nagarjuna, because the Asanga is yet to come, so widely there is not a philosophical system known as Chittamatrin or the mind-only school. So because it is said to be initiated by Asanga, but the assertions similar to the mind-only school does exist. So therefore, so even those people who share the same assertion as the mind-only school proponents cannot accept the perfection of wisdom as ultimate and definitive. So those proponents are taken as the opponent in the Nagarjuna's wisdom text. So when Nagarjuna criticized the lower schools, especially the mind-only schools and others, who in turn also criticized Nagarjuna about his presentation of the absence of the inherent existence. And Nagarjuna criticized in this way that first, you do not understand the purpose of emptiness. Secondly, you do not understand the meaning or the definition of emptiness. Third, you do not understand what is the classification of the emptiness. First, what is the purpose of understanding the emptiness? And Nagarjuna says that first it is in order to eliminate the afflictions, and also the afflictions, here we have the afflictions on the one side and the karma on the other side. And the main purpose here is to cut the root of all the afflicted emotions. And as we have discussed that it is due to the ignorance that we are constantly being reborn into this cyclic existence. So in order to liberate all the suffering beings from this cyclic existence, so therefore the emptiness is being taught. And it is only one mind which goes completely against, or which is the direct antidote of the mind grasping through existence, that can help one realize the emptiness, being free from the suffering. And this is very important. And sometimes we feel that, oh, this emptiness may be just a flattery or just a poetic work coming from the Nagarjuna. And maybe it is his text on wisdom, maybe just one of his PhD thesis, or just one of his poetic works. So some people may have such notions, but this is not the case here. So the idea of emptiness, on one side, the reason why we are suffering is due to the afflictions that we have already discussed in the previous sessions. So first, we need to investigate this. And as we discussed before, once we are free of all the karma and the afflictions, I think this is in the 18th chapter. So the purpose of understanding or the presentation on the emptiness is that the basis of arising the conceptual elaborations, misconceptions, and which is the afflicted emotions or the ignorance here need to be eliminated. So in order to eliminate the ignorance, so merely by blessing, receiving blessing, or merely by prayer may not happen. And all the Buddhas and Bodhisattva, if by their blessing, if all our afflictions will be cleared, then as of now, there won't be any afflictions within us. And Buddha himself says that your negativities cannot be washed by water. In India, at that time, there is this notion that if you take if you take a bath in the river Ganga, all your impurities will be cleansed. So this is against that notion, and the suffering of the beings will not be cleared by hand, and one's own realization will not be able to transform or move or share to another people or gift as a present to other people. Then how is it possible? So how you are going to benefit the sentient peoples? So you cannot wash away their sins, you cannot clear their suffering with your hand, you cannot pass your realizations to us. So then how you are going to benefit? Then the fourth line comes by presenting the reality of all the phenomena. And I think here the reality, so whether it is the conventional or the ultimate, so reality of the things. So in brief, that if you engage in a good deed, then of course there will be a favorable result. And if you engage in the negative things, then there will be an unfavorable result. Then moving on to the next level, presenting about another level of Tibetan origination and ultimately leading oneself to the mere designated presentation about the Tibetan origination. So the only way to eliminate the misconception or the wrong perception here pertaining to the ignorance is by generating within ourselves another mind which is direct antidote or which is the direct opposite of that grasping. So therefore, Nagarjuna praises the Lord Buddha that you are the one who preach the Tibetan origination, therefore I prostrate to you. And so this is coming from the salutation verses of the Nagarjuna's text wisdom. And we can also find on the 26th chapter that since you have eliminated all the afflicted emotions and being motivated by the compassion, and you preach the teaching, therefore I made prostration to you. And also, when he presents the Tibetan origination, he presents about the 8 features. So from the entity point of view, it arises but not inherently. It ceases but do not inherently ceases. Then from the point of time, from the point of its place or the object, and from the point of one's language and so on. So these are the 8 that it cannot cease. It ceases but do not ceases inherently. So these are the 8 conceptual elaborations. So which is the nature of the things which is free of these 8 conceptual elaboration is considered here as the ultimate understanding of Tibetan origination. So this is an actual or a fact, and it has been found after going through very deep analysis and investigation. And all these phenomena, so when further put into investigation, then you cannot find anything out of it, even though it ceases, but it do not ceases by itself. So there is also a similar commentary coming from Chandakriti that all the things that arises and ceases do not exist in the purview of the ultimate meditative absorption, but they all exist only in the purview of the conventionalities. So since all the phenomena exist to us as existing from their own nature, so based on that, then the conceptual miselaborations came. That too brings a lot of afflicted emotions. So the main reason why the Nagarjuna presents gives a very detailed presentation about the wisdom, is to the main purpose is to eliminate even the object and the root of the ignorance. So even a small traces is remained. So based on that, another misconception may arise. So therefore, since there is nothing which exists inherently, so from the form to the enlightenment itself, there is not a single phenomenon that do not exist by its own nature. So if we are able to meditate or staying focus on such a kind of mind, then all the conceptual elaborations will be eliminated. And for example, the mind-only school speaks about the dependent phenomena such as things, but they also speaks about an emptiness which is actually free of the imputed phenomena. So those kind of dependent phenomena, which is not the imputed phenomena, is considered another form of emptiness. So things do not. Things and the mind and the object exist mutually, depending upon each other. So they refute the existence of the mind and object as different or by order. So this kind of the understanding of emptiness is very gross and the coarse, and such a kind of explanations and understanding will not be able to eliminate or cut the root of our afflictions. Because the very object of the emptiness, which is the dependent phenomena as being accepted by mind only, is actually by itself an inherent existence as accepted by them. So therefore, Nagarjuna concludes that those who criticize my presentation on emptiness is that they have not understand what is the purpose of the presentation on emptiness. And the real nature of emptiness is something that cannot be even conceived or that cannot be even expressed by language. So Nagarjuna's word comes that whatever is dependent arising, so it's by nature empty. So therefore, this is the ultimate truth and this is the ultimate emptiness. And this is the middle way philosophy. So therefore, the Madhyamika philosophy's presentation or acceptance about the emptiness is actually grounded on the fact that things are interdependent, and I think it's one of the texts from Nagarjuna. If the things are said to be arising from their own side or their own nature, then they cannot be accepted as being depending upon their cause or result. So therefore, if they exist from their own entity, then they do not have to depend on the cause, because these are the two contradictory things. So when things arise from cause, so their respective causes, so then they depend on the causes for their own arising. So which is here quite contradictory. So to the assertion that things arises from their causes on the one side and they exist inherently on the other side. So therefore, from this analysis of the dependent arising, has the capacity or the potential to erase or eliminate those kind of understanding, those kind of assertions which fall on the two extremisms. So therefore, now we have to think about what is the measure of understanding emptiness and what is the measure of completing one's analysis or investigation. And I think what Lama Tsongkhapa has presented in the three aspects of the principle is very relevant. So from the time when we study the perfection of wisdom, and from those different analyses from the one and many, and so on. So from that time onwards, we have to use those reasons and analysis for as a means for understanding emptiness. But that was a very baby step at that time, and we have not attained the ultimate realization of the emptiness. But what is the measure of then completing or understanding completely the emptiness, or gaining the whole view, is when we understand the nature without being any alternate, that when the appearance and the emptiness doesn't appear alternate, then within just one moment, if we are able to understand both of them as being empty and also the conventionality at the same time, so this is the measure of understanding emptiness. So the appearance has the potential to eliminate the one extremism where it is considered as existing by its own inherent existence. So all the traditions actually accept about these different realizations pertaining to emptiness, but there is a difference in terms of the order. And I think we can also find in Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on the Nagarjuna's wisdom text a similar presentation. So therefore, we also need to, once we have a little bit of experience and understanding pertaining to the profound view, so then merely just by seeing the infallibility, just by seeing the nature of Tibetan origination, it has the capacity to draw us to the understanding of emptiness. And the main purpose of meditating on the emptiness is to cut the root of all the conceptual elaborations, and so that not even traces of the grasping of the true existent arises. And as it is presented that in the similar to the autumn's cloud in the sky, and as it is by nature a very illusion that can change very immediately, similarly, the emptiness has to be taken in this way. So this is the very summary answer, and coming from the mathematical point of view. And we can also find from the Lama Tsongkhapas, especially in that chapter, first how to negate the object of negation, then which school, whether it's the Prasangika or the Svatantrika, then how do we have to abolish it. And this is again not his own creation. He has the sources in the clear words of Chandakriti, the Prasanapata. Then whatever is coming from Chandakritis, the clever text, is again being referred to the other text. It is related to those kind of debate between the Bhavaviveka's text. It's just something like a Q&A session between the Chandakriti and the Bhavaviveka pertaining to the one of the lines coming from the Buddha Palita and explaining that line. So they have this disagreement. And the Chandakriti criticized in this way that even though Bhavaviveka, you have tried to explain the line coming from Buddha Palita's line, so even though you have understand only the literal meaning of that text, but you have not been able to understand completely, so therefore this is the way how the Dhammakriti criticized Baba Viveka's presentation pertaining to the lines coming from Buddhapalita. So therefore, this great the topic of the common subject has came into being. So therefore, it is important to draw a distinction between the Madhyamika Prasangika and Swatantrika. So in order to understand these great differences, first we have to study the text, then after a lot of reflections and contemplations, so ultimately we will gain some understanding about this emptiness and other presentations. So Nagarjuna is actually presented considering the directly presented the content of the content, which is the emptiness, as the main content, and Arya Asanga presented the other content, which is the great extensive part. The great extensive part very extensively. So one master explained the profound view very discreetly, and the other one explained the great extensive in a very detailed way. So in the Abhisamaya Alamkara, one of the texts of Maitreya, we can find there are certain verses which speaks about the selflessness, where there is some reference to the objects and the mind as not being one and so on. So it seems that this text of Abhisamaya Alamkara seems to be common to, or seems to be favorable to all the three classes of practitioners. But when it comes to the sublime continuum, the Uttara Tantra, the text, the fifth text, then it is completely a Madhyamika philosophy. And if you look at the ornament of the sutra, which is the other text, seems to be presenting more towards the mind-only school's presentation. So in these five texts, we can find that these five texts actually cover both the presentations coming from the mind-only school and the middle way school. So once Nagarjuna has already presented the emptiness, the presentation on emptiness in a very detail. So after that, in order to present these kind of topics according to the mind-only school in a much detailed way, in a much clearer way, so therefore Arya Asanga found the mind-only school. So therefore, Arya Asanga is considered as the trailblazer or the initiator of the mind-only school. So before that, there is not such distinction of someone referring to a trailblazer of a mind-only school or the Madhyamika school. So ultimately, it is so important to understand the purpose of why we need to understand emptiness. Then if you do not understand, then this is a kind of a big headache. So once we understand that, then we have to see that it has the potential to directly hit the object and the whole of the graspings, the true graspings, the grasping of true existence. With that, one will be able to stay on the path that leads to the enlightenment. So therefore, especially someone who wishes to attain enlightenment, it is very necessary to work hard and make effort to understand emptiness as much as possible. And as the line comes here, that the upper presentations coming from the upper tenets actually refute and prove the lower presentations are fallible. So therefore, if we think about the Sutranta's presentation about the external phenomena, which is not related to the mind, then the mind-only school object to it by saying that things cannot be externally established. So they has to be common or substantially one with the mind. So then the term substance, substantially one with the mind. So sometimes the term substance becomes a kind of, it has a connotation of inherent existence. So one of my teachers says that in the Madhyamika Prasangika, do you even do not have the offering substances? Because the term substance is same. So generally it seems that in the highest Madhyamika school, they do not seem to even accept the existence of a substance. So this is not much important here. So the presentation coming from the Sutranta schools are mostly refuted by the upper school, which is the mind-only schools. Then the presentations again coming from many of those coming from the mind-only school were being refuted by the upper school, which is the Madhyamika school. Then the ultimate emptiness or the selflessness is being explained from the perspective of its object of negation. For example, the lower Madhyamika school says that the selflessness as a, depending upon the object and the person and the phenomena, so the selflessness differs on the person and the selflessness. Then the mind-only school says that the external phenomena do not exist by their own self, but the mind, which is focused inside our own experience, and all these things do have their own existence. So therefore, such a kind of the school's presentation may not be so effective in dealing with one's inner emotions. So therefore, there is a big reason behind why the Madhyamika refuted this kind of acceptance assertions. So the Madhyamika Prasangika school, which is the highest one, even refute conventionally the existence of any inherent existence. So this is the highest and the most wonderful. So then how does the senior or the upper tenets negate the assertions coming from the lower ones? So we have to first find the contradictory points of the presentations coming from the lower schools. So all the assertions coming from the lower tenets are actually being refuted by the upper schools. Then how come that even the enlightenment state or the liberation state, then all the conventional phenomena, whether they exist or not, this is that all this conventionality and the phenomena do exist only by mere designation. And I think this commentary by Lama Tsongkhapa is very wonderful, that it is widely known and it is not refuted by a conventional valid cognition, and it is not even refuted by a mind understanding the ultimate. We can find similar content coming from the Indian text, but there is not clear presentation as done by Lama Tsongkhapa. So maybe I haven't seen all the texts, but I've seen a part of most of them. So whatever is widely known in the world may not have to be existent. So something which is widely known, and that is not being negated by another valid cognition has to be considered an existent. Then, for example, as the mind-only school's acceptance as fundamental mind, the alaya. So this is a concept being taken from the perspective of something that can be found when thoroughly investigated. So therefore, the highest Madhyamika school refuted such kind of assertions, and this is very detailed. So we are in the verse number 4 and the 4th line. So all these conventional phenomena are not being considered and existent after being critically analyzed, but conventionally they are exist. So verse number 5, although they are similar in appearance, common people behold, form and other such things and conceive them to be really existent. For example, take an example of a flower. So even the higher mathematical schools, the proponents of those schools accept that, and the lower ones also accept. So even it is the one flower, but other ones consider that as not being existing, not being inherently existent, but other one will consider the opposite. So for the proponents of mathematical schools, even though it appears as having its own intrinsic nature, but they consider that as an illusion and not having its that not being its own existing from its own nature, but it's a mere illusion or an appearance. But then there is another distinction whether the object of negation can be appeared to the sensories, to our senses. So this kind of phenomena actually appear to our senses and to our mind as being intrinsically existent. But when we analyze further whether they really exist inherently or not, so this process of analysis is called ultimate analysis. So therefore, we say that the object of negation, which is the true existence, doesn't appear to the sense. So now when I look at you, so in this hall, there are about 2,000 people here, and you're all true, you're all here. So all of you appear to my senses. And when you appear to my eyesight, you appear as having your own existence. So to the six conceptions, we appear all the external phenomena as having their own existence. So therefore, the object of the negation appears to the consciousness, the sense. This is according to the highest mathematical school. So even though you all may not exist as inherently, but you appear as inherently existent. So this is contradictory in terms of different appearance and difference in reality, so which is similar to a magic or an illusion. So therefore, the ultimate view comes here that all these things do not have its own existence except being completely mental projection. So we end verse number 6. The forms and so forth are established by true perception. So all the forms and those things, actually, we can enjoy, we can see, but they are all widely established as being known to everyone. So isn't it contradictory to say that they are false? Then here the discussion about the valid cognition in Dhammakriti's text, then there is another description about the valid cognition, about whether they are valid to intrinsic object or not. So here the valid cognition actually refers to something which is not a mistaken conception. And also for the object, we have different objects, the objects that appearance objects, and also the apprehending objects, the object to be perceived. So there are different classifications for the objects of a mind also. And I think these details, these classifications are very detailed. And also we speak about the direct perceptions as apprehending the object as a whole, and the language and the conceptual thought as being distinguished or discriminating while engaging in the object. And also when the monks first study their first level of debate, we study about the negatives and the positives. So these are very relevant. I think about 2 years ago in Delhi, we had International Hindu Conference, and I was invited. And I told them that so the great Indian masters in the past, Aryadeva and Bhavaviveka and Chandrakriti, and in their texts, many assertions, many views of those opponents pertaining to the non-Buddhists are very clearly written, especially about the language and the conceptual thought as engaging to one's object by discriminating, by taking sides. But at that time in Tibet, of course, during at that time, the non-Buddhists really seems to be even studying very hard and seems to have a very extensive philosophical system. But nowadays, most of these non-Buddhists and ancient Hindu practitioners seems to be merely focusing on some kind of ritual rather than really studying very deep on their philosophical system. So this is my urge, and I requested them to study further. During the Nalanda University's time, when a lot of non-Buddhists come to have debate with the Nalanda masters, so when someone is, some opponent is coming to oppose against, to refute or to fight with your views, of course, at the other side, the scholars also need to study a lot and read the other texts, and it helps mutually. So if there are no opponents, of course, then the Buddhist monks may have also ended up doing some rituals and the prayers. So I think no need to go very detailed from this onwards. There is a verse where the mindfulness school's assertion is refuted. I think it's the mindfulness school where they perceive, whether they debate about whether the external phenomena exist or not, and whether the existence of external phenomena is established, but whether there is a valid cognition that perceives it or not. So therefore, whatever is perceived by a mind is considered an existent. So even though there is a mind that perceives an object, so if someone sees an object, so if you have a eyesight problem, so merely by seeing by your eyesight may not be able to prove as a true existence, and that even I saw it, and even my friends saw it. So therefore, the second level of the mind, which is first being perceived by a valid cognition, and whatever you have perceived at the first level is not being refuted in the second level. So while going through this, I have forgotten what I am discussing here. So what is the other mind that perceives this mind? Then they have to find another set of mind called self-cognizing mind. So the mind-only school distinguish between the minds in the two classes. The first, the mind that actually focus to the external things, and another mind that perceives that mind, which is called the self-cognizing mind. And since they need to prove those minds as existing inherently, so whether the objects and the things exist or not, they're not, so there need to be another mind that perceives that object or not. So in order to prove the existence of the mind that perceives the object, we need to have another mind, which is called the self-cognizing mind. This is according to Mindfulness School's assertion. So not much to go detail in the next lines. So if I may say, so I'm not able to find this exact verse. So therefore, when it comes to the Madhyamika Prasangika school, so they also refute the existence of a self-cognizing mind as being accepted by the Mindfulness school. So I'm jumping to the next verse.
The sentence 38.
Verse number 30. Even if one knows that all phenomena are like an illusion, how will disturbing conceptions be turned away? So, in answer to that, the creator of this illusion has not abandoned the tendencies of the disturbing conception of desire towards noble entities such as women. Therefore, when he sees an illusory woman, the tendency emptiness is very weak. So even the magician knows that the things that appear, the image that appear in front of him or her is still an image of magic. But still, he do not have the consideration that that is the fact. That is a fact thing. So therefore, in terms of the magician, there is a difference between what appears to his sense and what reality he perceives. Verse number 31. The creator of this illusion has not abandoned the tendencies of the disturbing conception. So even the image created by a magician, maybe one could understand those images as merely an illusion, but what about the illusion itself? The illusion itself cannot be further proved as being empty of inherent existence. So therefore, unless we have a notion or a concept similar to the Madhyamika Prasangika, we won't be able to come to the conclusion that all the things do not have any inherent existence. And Buddha, when he presents the selflessness, he presents two selflessness pertaining to person and phenomena. Then if it extends extensive, then to 4, then to 6, and also to 16 and 20. So the most extensive presentation, classification of the emptiness is the 20th one. So then it speaks about emptiness of the external pertaining to external object, then inner object, then emptiness of emptiness. So this, which is the third one. For example, taking the person or the self as an example. So where I am, so where is the self? And the self which is being designated about the consciousness and the physical body, they cannot be also found when being subject to critical analysis. So they are also existing merely by mental projection without having any even inherent existence. So this is merely an object to be apprehended or understood by the ultimate realizing wisdom. But even that one, that emptiness itself, is also not having inherent existence. So that very emptiness of the the self has to be again proved further as being empty of inherent existence. So in Shaman Lamrim, we have a special reference to this. So the form as being empty of inherent existence is the emptiness of the form. So the form is conventional phenomenon, and the emptiness is the ultimate phenomenon. And the form itself, being empty of its own inherent existence, is sometimes being referred to as the one's own conventionality qualities. I think there is some reason for that. And so with this, in this way, we can find many different classifications of emptiness. If there is anything which is not being empty, then we can find emptiness which is not being empty of inherent existence. So since there is not even a trace of a particle that is not being empty of inherent existence, so therefore the emptiness itself is also empty of being inherent existence. So as the mindfulness school's acceptance that the mind it's the mind and all the other mental factors as having inherent existence is very illogical. Verse number 33. When it is said that no things exist, this means that the things to be negated through existence which is under examination is not to be apprehended. And all these things, when not being critically analyzed, seems to be seems to be existing. But once subject to critical analysis, it seems there is nothing that is really existing. And when one is in a deep meditative equipoise, so in the meditative equipoise, there is no appearance of any conventional phenomena. So when one rises from one's meditative equipoise, which is the post-meditative equipoise, and then when the conventional things appear to us as having intrinsic nature, then they, through their own mind within themselves, telling themselves that this is not true, because this is really empty, but it appears as having inherent existence. So everything appears as illusion to them. So next is about the resultant state, about the qualities of the result. In verse number 36, and Madhyamika proponents asserts that all the things do not have their own existence. So when we say they are empty of inherent existence, we are not saying that they are not existence. So since we analyze and investigate whether things have inherent existence or not, so it ultimately proves that the mere existence of the phenomena are there, so they exist conventionally. And all the things that we have connection in our daily life that make a difference to our life, also they do not have their own inherent existence or true existence. And as we discussed before, that all the objects to which we develop attachment or anger is all being created or being overpriced by the different mental factors or the conceptual elaborations. And here the compassions and other qualities, when they look at the sentient beings and those things, since they arise or they develop through a long process of familiarization, so therefore I think there is not a single traces of conceptual elaborations to those compassions. But for the hatred, and the attachment and the anger. So these emotions do not come through the process of familiarizations. We have not trained for them, but it happens automatically by our own biological nature. So therefore, these emotions have the conceptual thoughts play a huge role in shaping the path of these emotions. So all these emotions, the disturbing emotions, actually come through the process of being driven by another conceptual thought, which is the wrong perception. And we have one reference in the 3rd chapter of the Abhisamaya Alamkara, where it says that if you have a faith, your own devotion or the faith towards Buddha, if it is combined or conjoined with the intrinsic perception, consideration of the Buddha as an inherent existence, so then that faith may no longer be a faith, but rather it will be a grasping. So therefore, if we have a good understanding of emptiness, then we will have to work hard to reduce the intensity of these conceptual elaborations and these conceptual thoughts which give rise to the emotions. And on the other side, all those factors which give rise to the compassion and other qualities, so we have to work hard to even give rise to make them further grow so that the compassion and the other qualities will grow within us.
40.
Verse number 40.
40.
Through cultivating a direct vision of the aspects of the Four Noble Truths, such as impermanence and so forth, so from this onwards, a few verses. And also the proving of the Mahayana teaching as being directly taught by Buddha is also coming from here. And the Vaibhashika and the Suttananda school accept only the teaching of the Buddha, only the first wheel of the turning of the Dharma. So they do not accept the second teaching and the others as the authentic teaching of Buddha. So they says that merely just by seeing or understanding about the Four Noble Truths will be enough to liberate one from the suffering. And within the Four Noble Truths, as we discussed yesterday about the emptiness and the selflessness, is here explained as a very coarse level of the understanding of emptiness. And so therefore, since we can attain liberation merely by studying that text, why should we rely on the perfection of wisdom and other texts to attain liberation? And the third line says that because it is taught in the perfection of wisdom scriptures that without the path of wisdom that understand emptiness, there will be no resultant awakening. So here Chandakriti actually refers to the scriptures to prove his stand. So verse number 41. So in this the next verse from the King of Concentration Sutra and other Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. So these all are scriptural sources. So now look to 45. So from the 45 onwards is more about how it is being proved by logical reasoning. So even the arahats, who are the really true holder of the teachings, so if they have not understood the true emptiness, how will they be able to liberate from the samsara? So here, when we speak about the Vaibhashika, so we meant the philosophical tenets, but merely in those in the class of the here and solitary realizers are different. So here, the opponent is actually the philosophical tenets, the two lower philosophical tenets of Vaibhashika and Sutranda. When I have the chance to go to Thailand a few times in early 1960s, and there is a great practitioner, a Bande called Buddhadasi, and he's very interested to the presentation with respect to selflessness and emptiness. And his understanding of his interest in the emptiness was actually mostly restricted to the presentations coming from Chinese tradition, which is on the Maitoni school's presentation. So he was not very well versed about those quotations coming from Chandakriti's text. And later, when I went, he was already passed away. And the resident where around his residence, there was a little bit debate courtyard with some sand and stones, and a big tree, and there was a huge stone, I think about this stone, and he was sitting on this. And since he's a bhikshu, so he will put his mat on it and sit on that when he gives teaching. Then I feel really very faith devoted to him. So Lord Buddha also teaches in this way. In Tibet, we speak about the lion thrones, and the thrones very adorned and very high-rise thrones. I think it was one of the Amdo monk, Amdo Rinpoche's. He's a great scholar, a renowned practitioner of Bodhisattva, and one of his texts, he has prayed in this way. May I be reborn in the lower realms, taking the place of, in place of all the other animals who have accumulated a lot of negative actions, and may I be always in the hell realms to help the other people. So he says that Tibetan monks have very long names but very short qualifications. Indian masters have very short name but high qualifications. So Buddhadasa is, of course, he lived in a very simple way on a stone, a slab of stone, and he gives his teaching. So I was really struck by his simplicity and his humility. So the following verses are actually a kind of Q&A between the Vaibhashika and the Madhyamika Prasangika proponents. So if someone studies accordingly to the Vaibhashika schools and the lower Abhidhamma schools, which are actually referring to all the schools below Madhyamika Prasangika school, so even if they attained Arahat, the state of normal learning, so then the Prasangika responded that in terms of the emotions, afflicted emotions, there are different subtleties. And there's also a gross level of afflicted emotions, which are like the eternalism, the consideration of the things that's permanent and so on, and also consideration apprehending the self as sustained, self-sustained, and sufficiently existent, and so on. So there are different subtleties concerning the afflicted emotions. And these classifications are also coming from the commentary on the 400 verses by Dhammakriti. The ignorance stays all part of our body, just as the physical faculty resides all over our body. So therefore, if we defeat the ignorance, so which is the source of all the other things, so we will be able to defeat it. So therefore, having seen the Tibetan origination, one will be able to understand the emptiness. So once we understand the Tibetan origination, so the ignorance will not arise. So since similar to taking the metaphor as the body faculty is spread all over our body from the head to toe, so similarly, taking this as a metaphor, the ignorance, which is the root of all the afflictions, is also present as the root for all the afflicted emotions. So therefore, taking attachment as an example, and for all the other afflictions, if you cut the root which is the ignorance, so then all the other afflictions will automatically cease by themselves. So then how we have to cut or uproot the ignorance? That is only by through seeing the Tibetan origination. I think it may be the commentary on this verse or then the other line. I'm not so sure. So Chandakriti has stated in this way. So all the afflicted emotions are not being different from ignorance, and they all arise with the ignorance as the cause. So the other second reference, that the afflicted emotions are not different from ignorance, means that they are corresponding with the ignorance. So which means that here they are same, the afflicted emotion and the ignorance are same. And the second reference where the afflicted emotions arises due to the ignorance as the cause is those afflicted emotions which can be even identified by the lower schools. So the first one, which is not different from the ignorance, is the very subtle form of afflicted emotions. So we have two distinctions of afflicted emotions here, and therefore those lower schools, other than the Madhyamika Prasangika schools, even though you might have studied the Four Noble Truths coming from your text, but you won't be able to uproot or eliminate completely that subtle level of afflicted emotions. So the lower schools may consider some of the afflicted emotions that is only identified by the highest Madhyamika school as true perceptions. So those afflicted emotions that are identified by the lower schools, and even you can stop the rising of those afflicted emotions for a moment, but the very subtle afflicted emotions within you, which you cannot identify, may give rise to, and you may get rebirth again in the samsara. So even though this afflicted emotion is not being presented in your text, but this is actually the very root of all the afflicted emotions. So this is actually the debate between the Vaibhashika and the other schools and the Madhyamika Prasangika school. So during these verses, the proving of the Mahayana teaching as authentic teaching of Buddha is also included in these verses. So let's move to verse number 52.
52 sentence. Sentence 52. Okay. 52 sentence. Sentence 52. Okay.
For those who experience suffering as a result of being confused about emptiness, then while remaining in cyclic existence to accomplish inconceivable benefit for others by means of liberating them from the two extremes of desiring the happiness of cyclic existence and fearing suffering is the fruit of meditating on emptiness. Moving to verse number 53 and 54, the remedy for the darkness of the obscurations of distributing conception. And from next onwards, it's about meditating on the selflessness pertaining to a person. So even those who accept the selflessness pertaining to phenomena also have laid out a classification in terms of subtlety for the selflessness pertaining to self and person and phenomena. There are also such quotations that unless we have the grasping for our physical aggregates, we will tend to have grasping for the self. So therefore, in order to understand the very subtle form of the selflessness pertaining to a person, we need to have understanding pertaining to the selflessness of phenomena. So therefore, these two selflessnesses, from the negation point of view, object of negation point of view, there is no subtlety. But the only difference between these two selflessness is from their basis, the object of basis. So even though when we count about the emptiness or the nature, it is equal to the number of the phenomena in the world, but taking the self as an agent, then your belongings. So with these two considerations, the first considering yourself as the self, so you develop the self-grasping. Then you look at your belongings and consider them as your belonging and develop attachment towards them. So with these two graspings and attachment, just like a well, as the buckets in the well move continuously one after the another, so we take rebirth in the samsara continuously. So therefore, Chandakriti presents these two classification of selflessness pertaining to self and phenomena. So even though there is no difference in terms of its subtlety, but due to the basis of their object, on which the two selflessness are designed, so due to that, it may have some difference appearing to our mind.
58.
So let's move to verse number 58. So the teeth, hair, and nails are not the self. So the self which appeared to mind as having its own independent nature. So such a kind of self, or the I, if it really exists, it has to exist within this body, or within this consciousness, or the mind. So we cannot find it. So neither the teeth, hair, and nails are not the self. The self is not bones, nor blood. It is neither mass, nor is it phlegm, and nor is it limb or purse. So the next verse onwards actually refer to the different limbs and the body parts. And ultimately, even the collection of the six consciousness are not even the self. Nagarjuna's precious Colin, there is one phrase where it says that the self is not the earth element, the water, and all the other four remaining elements. If that is not the case, then what is the nature of self? not even the consciousness. So the four elements counted for the first. So neither of the four elements are not the basis of the self or the point of reference of the self. Then not even the consciousness is the basis of the self. So the alaya or the foundational mind as accepted by mind only is also a consciousness. The mental is also a consciousness. So not even all the aggregates, if you take apart, is not a point of reference of the self. So self cannot be completely different from the aggregates. So if you analyze further from your head to toe, where can you find yourself? So therefore, we have reference here, the teeth and hair. So if you are bald head, then where you have to point? If you have no hair. So all this, your hair and teeth are neither the representations of yourself. And what about the mind then? So even in Buddhist philosophical systems, there are many proponents who propose one of the consciousness as a point of reference of the self. So if we contemplate further, is it the sense, the five senses? Of course they are not. Then is it the mental consciousness? Then while we are sleeping, so if we have to keep the consciousness at the time of awake, then while sleeping we may have to say there is no self. Then if we have to keep during the sleeping, then we may have to say once we are awake there is no self. So if you have to analyze in these terms of the subtlety and speaking from the tantric point of view, the very subtle clear light has to be the point of reference of the self. So then we have to again say that when it is evident or rising, then the person is there, the self is there. And when it is not arising, then we have to say that there is no self. So these are all very irrelevant logic. So the self or the persons, when you analyze further and try to find it, there is no way that we can come to a point where we can catch it. From the verse number 60, it's actually refuting the assertions coming from non-Buddhist school. So no need to read this verse.
67. 67.
So please turn to verse number 67. Even if self were unchanging, then how, through being endowed with the mind, could a self that is not conscious of object come to be conscious of them? So we keep on changing our body all the time. Then the self, if self is the body, then self has to be present in the previous life and also for the next life. So then how can we pinpoint ourselves? And if there is no self, then there cannot be a relation or a connection between the one who planted those karmic imprints and the one who enjoyed those results. So ultimately, self is merely a designation which is commonly or widely known, and people are just, we have to just take it as a self, but which cannot be found when analyzed. That this is the one who planted or who did the causes, and this is the one who enjoyed the results. Even the self momentarily changes, but the continuity. So if you think from the very subtle of the mind, so the continuity of the mind continues. So similarly, when we take a new rebirth, so the senses and those other mind and mental factors continue to keep. So similarly, the self also continues from one life to another. We have a similar reference in the in the unsurpassed continuum takes by Maitreya. In the formation of this universe, when the previous world is destroyed, and before this world came into being, these have reference about space particle, and a very tiny or subtle particle called a space particle within this empty space. The wind or the air came into being. And the air here is reference to the moving. Then from that, the energy came. Then from the energy, the water. Then from water, the earth, the soil. Then when the earth and the world disintegrates, and the earth dissolves into water, and the water dissolves into fire, and the fire dissolves into the wind. So this is the disintegration process, the order. So this whole world actually arises from the 5 elements and disintegrates into the 5 elements. So the space particle is being taken as the point where all dissolves into and where all arises from. So even we can think the same for our from the tantric point of view. We may even say that there is a presence of the form, a very tiny form even in the formless realm. So this world where we have the form, for example, speaking about the sentient beings on this world, we have the 5 elements, and upon the 5 elements we add the 6, which is the consciousness. So we have 6 elements, which is the soil, which is the earth, then water, air, and fire, then consciousness, which are the total 5. So the consciousness here is actually the one who kind of a feeling. Then when it comes to space, so if he speaks from the Guhya Samaja tradition, it's about the 4 empty, 4 space, about the first, second, third, and fourth empty. And when it comes to the 4th, which is the total exhaustions of any elaborations, this is the point where all the beings actually dissolve into and where it actually originates from. So this is the inner space. So therefore, the reference of a person cannot be a consciousness. Even if you take the consciousness as the ultimate subtle mind, even at that time the mind also have to disintegrate. So that is the reason why it cannot be either one of the 5 elements. So since the self cannot be found when critically analyzed, but when conventionally, when not subject to critical analysis, we can find the self conventionally. Just a mere self, as is widely known in the world, can be found conventionally. So therefore, this kind of the self, the conventional self, can have continuity from one life, and this self can be an agent for accumulation of merits or any karma, and also enjoy the result. So let's move to 70. So the past consciousness is already ceased, and the future one is yet to arrive. So if he speaks from the very subtle subtle form of impermanence, then the arising and the disintegration process both happen to be at the same moment. So even generally, conventionally, when we speak, the moment of arising and the moment of disintegration is two different moments, but critically analysis, so it is very difficult to find two separate moments. So this is with respect to the establishment of the selflessness pertaining to self. So please move to 72. If there is no permanent self, neither the mind of the past nor the mind of the self, because they are not existence, one is ceased and other is not yet been produced. And the next verse also explains that all these things actually exist only as being known conventionally, and merely by that fact we have to establish them as existent. So they cannot be proved when critically analyzed. If that is the case, then if there are no sentient beings, then to whom we should feel compassion? If there is no self, then there will not be Buddha, then we cannot even attain the Buddha's state, the state of Buddhahood. So all this has to be established in that way, merely in the presence of a wrong perception. So all these conventional phenomena, so when we categorize them into the two truths as conventional truth, so this truth is actually truth from the perspective of the mind that grasps the grasping of the true existence. So this is another category of identifying the conventional phenomena as categorizing under the conventional truth. The confusion about the self should be rejected because it increases such things as self-importance, which are causes for suffering. So all the afflicted emotions within us actually come by or arises by the ignorant, which is the grasping of true existence. And in order to eliminate that, there is no other better than meditating on selflessness. So next is about identifying the selflessness pertaining to phenomena. Verse number 75. I think in English is the 78. So when you have to identify which is the body, so the whole body is actually composed by different body parts and body limbs. So all of these parts need not be the whole body. Without the body, there won't be any parts. Without the parts, there won't be any body. So therefore, both of these are mere interdependent, so designated upon each other. So these both titles are given in dependence upon each other. So the 78 verse onwards. if the body abided in all its limbs equally in all directions, indeed I could say that all the parts of the body abide in the part of its limbs. So as we have given the explanation for the body and its limbs, similarly for mind, it is same. The mind as a whole and the different classification of the mind. And the continuity of the mind is the only source from which we can establish the mind. For the form, there are the different directions, but when it comes to the subtlest, for example, to the atoms and the nucleus, and nowadays the quarks, and the first and the second and the third quarks and so on, even for those little tiny particles, maybe we can even we can even have some part, But when it comes to the ultimate tiny, but still they move. So when we say that when they move, we may have to say that there is a front side and the back side. So as long as you are by nature of a form, you tend to have a few sides. So without any parts, so when you are assembled together, put one upon another, there cannot be the possibility of forming a heap. So therefore, some says that there is no partless. For the mind, mind is not partless in terms of its continuity. So the past, the mind perspective of the past are already ceased, and the future is yet to arrive. So the present one, as it is presented in the wisdom text, I think it's in the second chapter, when we speak about whether there is familiarization or not. So maybe the half of the present is past and the half of the present may be future, and the present moment itself do not have its own identity. If you really look further and brood further, so half is already belonging to the past and half to the future, so you cannot find anything intrinsic by nature for the present. If you look at the timings, for example, when we speak about eras or centuries, and within the 1 year we can speak about the 3 times, within the day we can have the same 3 times. So if you come to the point, hour, minute, second, so then where is the present? 1 second, or just even for 1 second, how can you point for the present? So the mind, the continuity of the mind has to be actually established from the point of its continuity. So therefore, it is very difficult to get an exact the basis of the self. So which is the verse? 81, verse number 81. So this summarizes all the presentations that we have done before. So when not subject to critical analysis, of course, we can have a distinction between what is good and what is bad. But when we are under the influence of the emotions, so as it is elaborated by the misconceptions, so therefore we cannot distinguish between what is right and wrong. So this is about the meditation on the selflessness pertaining to the phenomena from the mindfulness pertaining to the self. Then next is the mindfulness pertaining to the feeling. It also from the perspective of locating oneself in the three times. So my watch is not working. It's struck. So what's the time now?
My watch telling lie. Still 2 o'clock. 그래서 가. 수고 돼.
So from this onwards, the process of the logic reasoning seems to be same. So maybe we will summarize here.
That is 97.
So verse number 97.
97. That 대니 밑에 봐.
This is about the two truths cannot be also established because when critically analyzed, they cannot even be found. So if there is no conventional, then there is not the basis of the designation. So if there is no conventional phenomena, then there cannot be also the ultimate truth. So here the conventional is actually referring to all the appearance. So if that do not have its own conventional, its own reality, then how can also the enlightenment and nirvana be possible? So we are in the verse number 106 in English. If in this way all phenomena do not arise, then there will be no deceptive truths which arise and perish. How could two truths be presented in the Madhyamika tradition? So even these two truths cannot be found when subject to critical analysis, but conventionally they make their existence make a difference. So therefore, as being widely known, so they can be understood as being existent. And now here comes another very subtle classification about whether things are ultimate pertaining to the mind of the common people. So this is also accepted by the autonomous school also. And the next verse says that everything is established as being widely known in the world. And the next is negating the views of the non-Buddhist philosophical systems. So the view comes pertaining to the Shiva as the causes of all the events in the world. And the next, we have the four analysis about the analysis from the point of the cause, the Diamond Slayer analysis. Then also analysis pertaining to the result, and also the analysis pertaining to its own entity, which is one and many. So therefore, things cannot be, even though they exist conventionally, but they cannot be created or exist as we wish them to be. So even we say that the result or a fruit arises from its cause. But whether it is arising by its own nature, then if the result is also something which arises by its own nature, then why should it depend on another cause for its own arising, for its own production? So therefore, if we analyze from the point of the result, it cannot be considered as an inherent existence. If you analyze from the point of its causes, it cannot be also considered as an inherent existence. So to summarize, from all this analysis, it cannot be proved as inherent existence. So therefore, the ultimate is the analysis of Tibetan origination, which concludes that all these phenomena are inherent existence. So therefore, it is called the king of reasons, king of analysis. So these verses are actually very helpful to us. So maybe I will read it. So 143.
143.
So English may not be same. So when you contemplate about the things as merely designated, so it really helps one in one's contemplation. In verse number 159, also I strive hard to live long and avoid illness. I am concerned with hunger, rest, and sleep. I am injured by others and keep meaningless company with the childish. Verse number 162, it will be hard to find the leisure of human life again, and extremely difficult to find the presence of the Buddhas. It is hard to forsake this flood of disturbing conceptions. Allah's sentient beings will continue to suffer. Verse number 164, for example, some ascetics wash themselves again and again, and others repeatedly enter fires. But although they thereby suffer greatly, they pride themselves in being content. In this world, which is very vibrant, and there are a lot of man-made sufferings, and which are all ultimately arising from over concern and attachment towards self-interest. So verse number 167, and by having in the manner of not referring to the true existence, respectfully gathered the accumulation of merit, to those who are rich and sad. So here completes the 9th chapter. So the 10th chapter, the dedication. So tomorrow, if there is time, we will read it. So till here, we haven't completed all the transmissions in terms of the lineage. We haven't read each and every verses, but completed the brief definitions and the meanings of the important verses. And you should always keep this text of Shantideva with you, and when you get time, read. And those the explanations that I have given, it may be some benefit of you, and consider this as a key. And keep this text with you all the time and read as often as possible, and not just reading. And also contemplate and meditate on it. Think about the meaning of these lines. not just like reading a story. So maybe compared to this month, the next month your understanding of the text may be better. And as your understanding increases, so this will help more towards you to change your mind. And as the change in your mind, the change in the mind actually means that the afflicted emotions, which are your enemies, if they are disintegrated or they are discouraged, then it will help your mind. And the positive side of the mind will continue to rise again. So please keep that in mind. So tomorrow morning, first we will do Bodhisattva vow, taking the Bodhisattva vow. So before taking the Bodhisattva vow, actually it will be great to have a Pratimoksha vow, individual liberation vows, as Adishai said that if someone has the individual liberation vow, it will be a very good basis to receive the Bodhisattva vow, and it will be a greater benefit. So we will take the Upasaka vow, the lay people's vow. So after the lay people's vow, we will do the Bodhisattva vow. Then after that, we will do the Manjushri's permission. So for the Bodhisattva vow, please bring the first part of this text from the second chapter. We will read slowly. So since there are different languages, and most of them I think are Chinese, so more Japanese or Chinese here. So some of you can read in Japanese, some of you can read in Chinese, some of you can read in Vietnamese, Korean, so you on your own language. So we will do a recitation of Heart Sutra tomorrow morning. And the reason is this place, actually we are in Japan, and Japan, first we will recite the Heart Sutra in Japanese language. Then we have more audience from Taiwan and People's Republic of China. So the Chinese devotees, then we will recite the Heart Sutra in Chinese. And the others you can recite in your own language. So no need to recite it very loud. So that's all.
So thank you very much. Good night.